I was like, do I want to start into it, or do I just want to start the episode? I heard Corbett talking about his propaganda watch, right? He has that whole series, and I've been wanting to start smart reads. I mean, I've had this on my list of someday maybes for a couple years, but then I did the pilot episode last year about this time, and it was well received, but it wasn't the highest and best use of my time at that time. So I planned on weaving it in once I had Autonomy up and running, bring it into season 2. And my thinking was halfway through season 2, I would launch Smart Reads and Quote Worthy, which I haven't picked the name for the show yet, but Smart Reads, notion of artifacts and books that are healthy to read, internalize knowledge, and Quote Worthy. These are all quote worthy artifacts. So I'm trying to figure that out. And then, so I'll do this every other week on a Wednesday, maybe this time slot, maybe not. And then in the studio, I'll do the flip side of this, which is history connected, taking information from books, movies, these sort of things, and modeling it in the history blueprint. And that's interactive as well. So my thinking was, these are cool activities to do. I have 1,000 books we could talk about one week after the other, right? So I wanted to start doing it with live audience, and the best audience I could think of were students and graduates from the Autonomy course, because we already have a culture of excellence. We're already in the mindset that we need to mine this knowledge out of these books while they're available, put it to use in our lifetime while we can. And so my version of triggering complexity this week was I put it on the schedule, and it moved a couple hours, the production today, but I still got it in and we're getting it done. So welcome. We have a lot of people hanging out, and this can be an interactive forum. Let me see what I got here. I'll be able to show you books. You'll be able to see me. Let's see if I can zoom out. Get this set up a little bit. Something like that. We'll be able to cut over to the browser once I put the browser up and make it stop going like that. Pardon that faux pas. So we can check out who Bernays was before we get into the book. And then I also have a button. You should be able to see me on screen while I do these sort of things. So that's the kind of format that we have to work from. We have some artifacts. We have access to the web. We have the ability to have interactive, dynamic questions and answers. And what I'll end up doing is reading some sections from the book. I haven't really looked at this book in 10 or 15 years since I read it, but I do have some things marked. I did learn a lot from reading it. And also to put it into context for people. Why would you want to read this book? One of the reasons, aside from Corbett's Propaganda Watch series, I thought it was it's a pretty slim book. It's an easy read. So is Public Opinion by Walter Lippmann, the other one we can talk about. It's essential to understand. If you don't understand Bernays and Lippmann, then your immune system for society is not turned on yet. What do I mean by that? Literacy is a form of slavery until a methodology of critical thinking is practiced by the reader. Why would you want to turn on your critical thinking? Well, how do you know that you would need to? Well, you read a couple quotes from these guys, Bernays and Lippmann, and figure out who they were. Why did they write these books? For whom did they write these books? And you start to see larger aspects of society come together that aren't put on our radar by education, by the schooling system, or mainstream media. And yet they exist, it's going on, and it's a top-down driver of all those sources that should have given us this information, but don't. And when you see that, you see schooling's not supposed to teach you how the world actually works, how words are used to manipulate people, to take away their free will, right? So, Propaganda. It's a book by Edward Bernays. Let me cut to it so you can see the cover. There we go. This is a reprint with an introduction by Mark Crispin Miller. And before we crack the cover, now that we see the book, the other book that prefaced this is Walter Lippmann's Public Opinion. Also, not a very thick book. This book here, Lippmann's Public Opinion, was written in 1921, and Bernays wrote this in 1928, heavily referencing Lippmann's work. So that's like a good starting point. Now let's jump over to the browser. Let's see who Eddie Bernays was. Let me cut the full screen so you can see it a little uninterrupted. Edward Louis Bernays was an Austrian-American pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda, referred to in his obituary as the, quote, father of public relations, end quote. Bernays was named one of the 100 most influential Americans of the 20th century by Life magazine. He is the subject of a full-length biography by Larry Tye called The Father of Spin, 1999, and later an award-winning 2002 documentary for BBC by Adam Curtis called The Century of Self. Now, if you have not seen The Century of the Self, it's a very good documentary. Adam Curtis produces a lot of very interesting work. And let me move back over here. Crystallizing Public Opinion was his 1923 book that was written still after Lippmann's Public Opinion. And Propaganda, 1928, gained special attention as early efforts to define and theorize the field of public relations. He had some influencers. Lippmann, Sigmund Freud was his uncle. But scrolling down, when you read a wiki page, you don't have to read every word, but you do need to find the sections that are relevant. After the United States entered World War I, the Committee on Public Information hired Bernays for its Bureau of Latin American Affairs, based in an office in New York. Now, I know that World War II, let me cut back to my camera real quick. In World War II, Nelson Rockefeller was in charge of Latin American affairs, and they led coups. Guatemala, 1953, overthrowing Jacobo Arbenz, CIA op. A lot of those in the 40s, 50s, 60s. You'll find later in this page that Lippmann's involved in that. So the fact that he's involved in Latin American propaganda during World War I should not be a surprise, and that like points at his lineage later. Continuing on. Bernays, along with Lieutenant F.E. Ackerman, focused on building support for war, domestically and abroad, focusing especially on businesses operating in Latin America. Bernays referred to this work as psychological warfare. Psychological warfare. So the guy who brings us propaganda, who's helping us to prop up political opinion, public opinion, psychological warfare, much like H.G. Wells was doing during World War I. After the fighting ended, Bernays was part of a 16-person publicity group working for the CPI at the Paris Peace Conference. A scandal arose from his reference to propaganda in the press release. As reported by the New York World, the, quote, announced object of the expedition is to interpret the work of the Peace Conference by keeping up a worldwide propaganda to disseminate American accomplishments and ideals. All right. Council on Public Relations is also covered on his wiki page here. But he's also an early participant in the Council on Foreign Relations. I don't really see that mentioned here. We're already to 1929, 1924. They skipped over that part. So that's interesting. All right, so now we know a little bit about Edward Bernays. Let's cut back to the book. And to do this, I'm going to don some spectacles so we can see what we're seeing. And I will cut you guys to full screen so you can see the book. And I will even zoom in a little bit so we can read it more definitely. Chapter 1. Let's see if we can do this and keep it in focus. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is the logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together in a smoothly functioning society. Our invisible governors are, in many cases, unaware of the identity of their fellow members of the inner cabinet. They govern by their qualities of natural leadership, their ability to supply needed ideas by their key position in the social structure. Whatever attitude one chooses toward this condition, it remains a fact that in almost every aspect of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons, the small number of persons, a trifling faction of our 120 million who understand the mental processes and the social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness the old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. It is not usually recognized how necessary these invisible governors are to the orderly functioning of our group life. In theory, every citizen may vote for whom he pleases. We, skipping down the page, we have voluntarily agreed to let an invisible government sift the data and high spot the outstanding issue so that our field of choice shall be narrowed to practical proportions. From our leaders and the media they use to reach the public, we accept the evidence and the demarcation of issues bearing upon the public question. From some ethical teacher, be it a minister, favorite essayist, or merely the prevailing opinion, we accept a standardized code of social conduct to which we conform most of the time. Now, at that point, we've just read 2 pages of this book. I would like to open it up for anyone who has a question, comment, observation, because otherwise I'll read a bunch of sections and then we'll have to try to go back and people will have a hard time remembering exactly what the verbiage was. So does anyone have a question or comment at this point?
Rich, who benefits from this manipulation of the masses?
That's a very good question, Tim Flynn. Who benefits from the manipulation of the masses? Who funded Bernays? Who funds these projects? People who already have some sort of influence in society, be that industrial or economic or political, and then from a top-down, outside of the government, it's supra-constitutional, it's outside of the mechanisms of government, these influences then get funding to create and control newspapers. So as a for instance, this book was written in 1928. Lippmann's book was 1921. This had already happened by then. This is not wishful thinking on the part of Bernays or Lippmann saying we should do this. They had already done it by then. So that's an interesting claim, Rich. What's your reference? My reference is Oscar Callaway, 1917, in his quote where he says that the major shipping interests and industrialists had already bought out the editors at the major newspapers for the purpose of confining data to a funnel that was pre-approved by people outside of our government, meaning from a top down, it was a manipulation. Now, this could also, it sounds good, but that's 100 years ago. 60 or 70 years ago in 1947, Bernays wrote like his bookend to all this other work, which was The Engineering of Consent. So it's not just in 1928 they had these ideas. They continued to refine these ideas until they're like, Chomsky's book is Manufacturing Consent. That's a nod back to the engineering of consent, social engineering. So they want control, command and control over human beings now and into the future. And the only way they can do that is to eradicate freedom. And the only way they can do that is to dumb us down.
And Bernays was involved in turning American opinion towards World War I as well, right? The Committee for Public Information. And my understanding was that when he went to Versailles for the treaty, that he was amazed at the crowds and how they loved America. And I'm wondering, was he responsible for the slogan, make the world safe for democracy?
That's a good question about that, because making the world safe for democracy, I thought, came in under Woodrow Wilson, and that would be around the same time as Committee for Public Information, because that's World War I. In between his work for CPI and the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, he was also part of the working group from the Royal Institute of International Affairs that became the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. So he's part of the proto group that brings that Anglo-American, that Anglophile society structure to America, and then it got injected into the political and economic structure of America. So he's like a carrier of that, not freedom, for sure. Anyone else with questions or observations? Is anyone surprised by that, or did you all know those quotes already?
I'm familiar with that book. I'm not as familiar with Walter Lippmann's book that you mentioned, so I will have to pick that up and read it. Another book that I would suggest people take a look at in relation to all this. And Richard, I'm not sure if you've read it yet, is Gustave Le Bon's The Crowd. It's an easy read, but it's an absolute requirement, kind of for the other side of this, of why do people buy into the propaganda and the psychology of crowds, and what, people like Edward Bernays understands. Le Bon does an in-depth dive on the psychology of why do people accept the propaganda. And it's interesting you mentioned the tie into the Council on Foreign Relations with Bernays, because they've put out statements, and people within that realm, and the high snooty news anchors and editors from Time magazine said that they're suggesting that propaganda be used on all citizens of all countries, that the government has to do this, and they mean propaganda in the Bernaysian sense. So they know what they're talking about when they speak of propaganda, and they directly aim that weapon at the citizens of any given country. And they know exactly what they're doing when they're using those terms.
And one of the influencers on Bernays' work was Gustave Le Bon, and he cites him and Lippmann and several others, including Freud, in the 1928 propaganda. Lippmann and Bernays, because they're so long ago, unless you get like pictures of them in your head, I often mix them up and think that Bernays' propaganda was 1921, when really it's 1928. Lippmann was first. And I also might be speaking out of turn. Maybe it was Lippmann that was so instrumental in bringing the Council on Foreign Relations to America. I'll fact check it when I do the post-production and editing for this.
Hey, Rich, can you hear me?
Yeah, Tony, how you doing?
I'm doing well. So I got a quick question. So let's say you tell this to someone who's not really aware of the Council on Foreign Relations. So how prolific is their involvement in producing propaganda?
As far as the Council on Foreign Relations and the practical applications of how they use propaganda, it's pretty prolific, because if you look at members of the government, like the State Department, I mean, it's not just, there is a few presidents that are members, but overall, it's the infrastructure around the government that is being modeled first by the Council on Foreign Relations, and talking points are issued and statements are made, and then the sycophants who support those ideas of unfreedom, they basically repeat those on Fox News and other places, or not just Fox, but MSNBC, CNN, all the places that are mouthpieces for Council on Foreign Relations activity and plans. So they're intimately connected, and oftentimes not illustrated to people. I thought Tim was going to say something. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you can imagine that they had the whole mainstream media bought off since the early 1900s, and they could control the narrative on any major event, as we've witnessed. If you've been around long enough, you can imagine the power that they have.
Just the continuity of power, like the influence that they've had is immense, but the continuity of power for about 100 years at this point. I mean, we're 2019. It's the centennial of Paris 1919, when they redrew country, like all these parts of the map. They're just like, here's a country here. They redrew, they gave away land that didn't belong to them. They promised land to 3 different parties at once. There's a whole bunch of shenanigans going on. These guys come in and iron it out through the Paris Treaty, which is a very one-sided conference. It was a land grab. It's a redistribution of wealth grab, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that go on there. So that's been 100 years. What they did after that was only ratcheted up and leverage every bit of that. So they started with a good plan, and they've continued to gain momentum and to gain footholds in the political structure and in the media structure. I mean, just not knowing who that single group is, and they're not the only group involved, but they're a key player in most of what people think is going on out there. So propaganda on behalf of their perspective is pretty much the game that's being played. And once you start to learn, like I have Foreign Affairs, their publication. I don't have all of them, but I have it all the way back, some of the issues back into the 40s and 50s. So you can see the evolution of their plan over time. That journal started out as the Journal of Race Relations, that was started by Thorsten Veblen. And so there's like a eugenics angle to the origin of the Council on Foreign Relations Foreign Affairs Journal that they use to shape the geopolitical reality. there's a lot there to unpack. And I think it's interesting, and I'm not making judgments or claims about it. I'm just saying these things exist. They exist in context of each other, and these contextual connections can be better understood, illustrated, researched, and this is a basis to start talking about that, because otherwise we kind of all know the quotes, a few of these quotes, right? I want to get to this next one. Did you have any more of your question, Tim? Did that answer your part?
It's really deep, so I'm gonna listen for the next quote.
Yeah, right on. All right, so let me cut back to book. There we go. Ta-da. The focused instruments by which public opinion is organized and focused may be misused. I'm sorry. The instruments by which public opinion is organized and focused may be misused, but such organization and focusing are necessary to orderly life. As civilization has become more complex, the need for invisible government has been increasingly demonstrated. The technical means have been invented and developed by which opinion may be regimented. With the printing press and the newspaper, the railroad, the telephone, the telegraph, radio, and airplanes, ideas can be spread rapidly and even instantaneously all over the whole of America. H.G. Wells senses the vast potentialities of these inventions when he writes in the New York Times, quote, modern means of communication, the power afforded by print, telephone, wireless, and so forth, of rapidly putting through directive, strategic, or technical conceptions to a great number of cooperating centers, of getting quick replies and effective discussion, have opened up a new world of political processes. Ideas and phrases can now be given an effectiveness greater than the effectiveness of any personality and stronger than any sectional interest. The common design can be documented and sustained against perversion and betrayal. It can be elaborated and developed steadily and widely without personal, local, and sectional misunderstanding. Now, what did we just learn in that part? Let's check it out. H.G. Wells, and we can cover this next week in the History Connected episode. Who is H.G. Wells? What was his relationship to Bernays? How do these guys affect? Because they're guys in different countries, but they have the same job, basically. They have very similar jobs in psychological warfare during wartime for allies who are Anglophiles, right? So there's a connectivity that most people see. Like, most people just see H.G. Wells as a science fiction writer. He wrote the book called The Time Machine, right? But he also wrote a book called The New World Order. He also wrote a book called The New Machiavellis. He also wrote a book called The Open Conspiracy, because he was in the meetings with they who were easily named, because they wrote it in their own words, and what they were plotting. H.G. Wells documents this in his books. It's a 2-volume set called An Experiment on Autobiography. So these types of nuggets that interconnect, that do have relevance to today's world, are easily attainable if you know the book exists and here's what's in the book that you might want to read. And then you can go and attain that part, and you can get it on PDF from internet.org. You can get a first edition. You can get it used from wherever. But starting to internalize the nuggets is how people start to get greater detail and context on the world. Like, H.G. Wells is not just a science fiction writer. He's a psychological warfare officer who was directing public awareness. And much like his student, Aldous Huxley, started to paint out a dystopic future, one that it's not about freedom. It's about conquest. It's about using a fear and control mentality to enslave the human potential instead of igniting learning, igniting the potential and directing it toward goals of individual wills. That's very hard to control. They don't want that going on. So, thus, propaganda, public opinion, number of other books that they've used and leveraged these techniques. All these Bertrand Russell books, using science to control human beings. If we're all adults in the room here, the fact that human beings try to control other human beings through history, like that's the story of history, it should not be surprising that some people don't want other people to be free and they're willing to take their freedom. And that's a lot of times through violence. And then there's an entire structure of our society that is based on the funding and continuation of mechanized, systematized violence. That started back in World War I. So the things that ignited back in the Paris Peace Conference, the Council on Foreign Relations in 21, Lippmann's book, Public Opinion in 1921, going through 1928, Public Opinion, continuing up through 1947, when the CIA was formed. I think the United Nations was formed maybe later that year, of engineering consent. Those organizations that I just mentioned are very much part of the same fabric that Bernays is working in and creating. Like, he's a textile creator. He's making the string. These other entities weave it into a fabric. But the string that they're creating is made out of, for lack of a term, it's like he's making out of whole cloth. They are willingly, a few people, shaping the minds of millions of people systematically through the use of technology. Using technology to control people is technocracy. It's like a technopoly. That was the Neil Postman book on that topic, technopoly. So all of these things do have relevant, not gravity, but they do have some reach, because we're surrounded by the toxic information that is purveyed as a result of 100 years without the American public really understanding what's in Bernays's book or Lippmann's books, or these other characters who decided that it was best for everyone else if they took control and artificially managed human beings, the growth and potential of the human species. Like, that's also right there with the eugenics philosophy. And the eugenics philosophy, it preceded their work in discovery with Darwin and these guys, Galton, about evolution. That's like a formalized scientific version of a predisposition that they had. So I think it all needs to be looked at, but I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like, we have to not assume and take the opportunity to jump into good books like Propaganda for this episode and just see what is there that we can easily glean, that we can take with us for the rest of our lives. Like, for most people, it's just read the first page. You get that much. I mean, the rest is just all about how they do that, the various ways that they do that. The last chapter is like how they bring in these techniques and use them on women in 1929 to get them to smoke. And they start this whole public movement where it becomes cool for women to smoke cigarettes. It's all laid out like this. It's very Machiavellian, but I don't want you to see characters like this guy. Like, he's not evil. He's a human being. And to judge him as good or evil, I don't think benefits anybody. However, he left these words in his book, and there's knowledge in here that can help you, but it has to get between your ears before it can work in your life. So this, the reason I wanted to do this series was to help to bridge that gap. So we'll start with the easy book that a lot of people know about. There's a lot of the books that we'll cover you guys never heard before, and your mind will be blown by how does that exist? And it's never been on my radar. So that's another purpose, to put things that are known in better context and better focus. Things that aren't known, let's introduce them into the body of evidence that exists for a small group of people who spend enormous amounts of time, energy, and wealth to control the rest of the people who aren't writing their own script in life because they're not thinking for themselves yet. These techniques in propaganda, Bernays and Lippmann are talking about, they prey on people who don't ask questions, which is why I think that learning's the answer. And what's the question? What is the question? What is the identity, the time, place, person, etc.? You have to ask, what is something? There's a blank there, and put a question mark. That starts thinking. These guys all depend on you being on stimulus reaction. And that's a very easy way for them to control large groups of people. If people reading the propaganda began using question marks at the end of their sentences, like you read it from Bernays, it has a period. When you read it in your head, put a question mark at the end. What is the evidence that he's offering? Because, as I said at the beginning, literacy is a form of slavery until a method of critical thinking is practiced by the reader. If you don't practice critical thinking, if you don't ask the questions as you read, then you're going to believe every declarative sentence, and that's like legit under control. That's not your conscience or consciousness acting. It's being programmed. So, to stimulate thinking. So anyone have a comment on H.G. Wells? Are you aware of H.G. Wells's role in psychological warfare and the future planning of lives? That, like, those ideas were created and they're put into action. Now they're affecting people's lives who were born many years after these guys died, because nobody's looked into it and it didn't become public knowledge that, mainstream media is totally worthless. Totally worthless. And yet a lot of people are making their life decisions based on that. They make their investment decisions based on that type of like low quality media. So the journalistic integrity has dwindled in this country because any type of place that could have legitimate journalism gets snuffed out by the people, the people with, well, they're cheating. They're not doing the real work. They're just peddling lies. And that's a lot easier for them to churn out. It's a lot lower overhead when you don't actually have to research your stories and actually do your own work. When you're just taking talking points from the White House and reading them as a newscast, that's the absence of journalistic integrity. And the fourth estate was supposed to be there to keep the people in government in check. The media originally, like as it's conceptualized, is supposed to keep those guys in check. They're supposed to be like watching the watchers, right? But that got bought out 102 years ago. So what do we do about it? We're born into a system where there's just toxic, ill information. It doesn't relate back to reality. And if people take that as reality, then their lives get really off track. They don't end up with satisfaction and fulfillment. So the key is understanding yourself and juxtaposing it to comparing it to that which exists. And if you do that, then propaganda and the techniques that they're using in these books, it's a failure. It is meant for people who do not have intellectual self-defense skills. Otherwise, like knowing about the techniques makes you pretty much immune to them.
Yeah, so when they roll out, "Hello, my name is Greta Thunberg. You killed my planet. Prepare to die." When they pull out, little 12-year-old girls and that amazing piece of propaganda there that I'm sure Edward Bernays would be super proud of, you need to have some sort of defense mechanism against all the emotional appeals that are going on there. Because I understand, it's hard to disagree with a child who's angry and wants you to be afraid, what she wants. I don't want people to be afraid. We want people to think clearly. And, she's just pushing emotional appeal, which obviously, she's probably being set up to do so. But speaking of Greta, is if you go look at her IMDb, at least it was this way before. She's on IMDb as an actress, and she's in other movies about activism and climate change like that. So she's practiced, and obviously someone saw her as a potential candidate for someone who could carry out the script and read the script on a global audience and not even necessarily know what she's doing. And if you go look at the Council on Foreign Relations and how it's spread its spider web out, and now basically all the major media outlets are owned by figures who are also tied in with the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg group and the Trilateral Commission and all those central hubs of propaganda. And there isn't there's obviously the alternative media movement and what people are doing like this, but the central command center and the main voice that's going out over the airways is still very much centralized, even if it's coming from Greta Thunberg, or any of these other actors and actresses. Like Angelina Jolie is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Well, why would they need an actress to be, making advisory decisions on foreign relations? Well, because they understand how propaganda works and the way that the public mind works and the public consciousness. And I have a quote here from Gustave Le Bon that says, "Such facts show us what is the value of testimony of crowds. Treatises on logic include the unanimity of numerous witnesses in the category of the strongest proofs that can be invoked in support of the exactness of a fact. Yet what we know of the psychology of crowds shows that treatises on logic need on this point to be rewritten. The events with regards to which there exists the most doubt are certainly those to which have been observed by the greatest number of persons. To say that a fact has been simultaneously verified by thousands of witnesses is to say as a rule that the real fact is very different from the accepted account of it." And, tying that in with Greta and the consensus science and this propaganda message that we're supposed to believe that if there's a consensus in science, that we just have to accept it generally. And that's a really big piece of propaganda that's being pushed on the public right now.
I mean, that is. So first off, science is never finished. Science is ongoing. Science is not found by consensus. Consensus is the opposite process of science. So there's a couple errors just in those statements that people repeat all the time. And until someone takes the time and say, "Hey, look, I understand what you're trying to say, but just so you know, that's contradictory. It doesn't make any sense." And that's why I can't internalize it. And we're having trouble communicating because I'm basing my knowledge of facts on things which exist. For instance, Greta is not the first person to be young and wheeled out in front of a UN audience. If you look at the 1992 Rio conference, basically an identical scene is created. That followed the Gulf War Babies and Incubators, which was Hill and Knowlton, a public relations firm that was hired to do that fraud, to make people believe that something's going on that that's actually not, right? So them using children, young people, to bring emotion to the situation is what they need. It's the only thing they can do, because the logic's going to fail. There's contradictions in their stance. They're trying to do something artificial. They have a desire to do something, and they come up with a hypothesis afterwards to justify it. And it's throughout the whole body of literature on the topic. The Earth Conference in 92 came from the conferences in 84 and 87. And you can hear these guys and what they're talking about and what they're trying to do. You could read the papers from like 67 and 68, where they said, we'd like to do these things, but people won't accept those things. So we're going to have to create these artificialities about these things to get people to believe these things. So there's a lot there to unpack, and simply saying conspiracy theorist is not only intellectually bankrupt, it's like a poor excuse not to think, because you're only damaging yourself. Right? Like you're refusing to build your best asset, which is learning how to ask questions and find substantial answers.
Yeah, another quote I have here says, the hardest thing to explain is the glaringly evident which everybody else has decided not to see. And that's Ayn Rand from The Fountainhead, as controversial as she might be. But I think that that's a great, what you were just saying, that's a great reason for this series. So congratulations on reigniting this and triggering your complexity and doing it live and in front of the Autonomy audience here. And I really think that a globalist book series, or uncovering their own words, what they've said and the plans that they've laid out, going into Huxley and the Grand Chessboard, some Brzezinski, or any number of the Wells, and so I'm excited to see you. Yeah, and you got a lot of different books, and probably some that a lot of us haven't heard of. So I think it's great to lay it out in their own words. Hey, here's and a lot of people wonder, why is this important to go into, and why would you read a book like Propaganda? What's the point now? And well, if you, to answer a lot of the questions of how some of the things are happening now or why they're happening, it definitely is important to go back and read some of these people that have been very influential with how society's been organized and structured, and understand why they think the way they think. It's not outright evil, although in the end I think that it is ultimately stemming from evil, like this urge to control human behavior and drive it in ways that people don't understand, like this hidden hand and this snootiness that Bernays is talking with, this kind of like we're so much better. It's like they see us as secondary. They see the plebs as a secondary subhuman category that allows them to then morally justify all these different things. So it is important to understand the psychology behind these bastards. They've got so much psychology on us. Well, it's time that we start to learn some of their psychology.
Well, and that's an interesting point too, because it's not whether or not Bernays is evil, but good people can take evil actions. And how would I define that? Bernays has the right to hold like self-contradictory ideas. That's his right as a human being. He has the right to communicate those self-contradictory ideas. And other people should, caveat emptor, buyer beware, don't accept those things, see them for the fallacious ideas that they are. But that's not really how it works. What happens is those guys concoct stories, they broadcast them out to millions of people. Why? Because otherwise people are going to vote against the war. People aren't going to, they're going to follow their free will. So those broadcast lies that those guys did to change the view on war, to change the view on colonization of Palestine. That's the next clip I have, or next sample I have, is he gives you a couple examples of how newspapers are used to conduct propaganda campaigns, right? So the telling of mass untruths to a bunch of people so that people can get killed so that they can make money from that. I think that's pretty much what evil is. When you're taking away other people's freedom systematically so that you can embolden yours, and you have to do it through deception, it tells me that they don't have the intellectual or moral or ethical high ground, and they don't seek to occupy it because it takes too much work to be in integrity like that. What they'd rather do is call this thing national security later, right? You want to engineer consent. National security hides the truth, so that everybody has to make their decisions based on not the truth. That's not freedom. So,
Rich, I think you're letting Bernays off the hook a little bit.
go ahead, put him back on the hook.
because he's involved in starting wars, getting people aligned for that. He was involved in mass water fluoridation, CIA coups, getting women to accept smoking and to want it actually. The only damn good thing he did was get people to eat bacon and eggs because it tastes so good. But he has done some interviews in his later years. He lived to be 95, I think. So he just died.
He lived to 103, actually.
Yeah, something like that. Like the past 10 or 15 years, like maybe 10 years ago, he died. And if you listen to him, you can get a sense of the amorality in his being just by listening to him and getting a sense of his presence. So I would encourage people to go take a peek at him and get it in his own words. And then you mentioned the H.G. Wells, and the one thing that really stands out, besides War of the Worlds for him, is his description of how the world 100 years from now will be populated by massive stadiums where people will gather and watch sports together and basically get drunk and allay all their fears of anything. So they won't be able to think.
I think he also came up with the idea of a world encyclopedia, like not like the internet, basically, an electronic encyclopedia that. And then in the 50s, there were some other people who built on those ideas. So literally, the way that we're interacting with each other right now is a sub-function of military wants and desires 100 years ago.
It's amazing that they let us do it.
So far, so good.
That's right.
You know, I think that teaching.
Hey, Richard, I wanted to add something with H.G. Wells.
Yeah, sure. What's up, Michael?
I just, one of the things that comes to mind is one of his other movies, I think, that came out 1936, The Shape of Things to Come, and the idea of, suspending disbelief through fiction and kind of creating that atmosphere where they're already creating reality, where they're projecting the future and kind of steering people towards the outcome that they want. And how that was done prior to World War II. You look at that movie, you'll see that it's almost a unbelievable kind of prediction of what the future was. But then if you look at even like Donald Trump today and the Simpsons episode predicting Donald Trump as the president, you see that you're still using the same techniques where they're using fiction to essentially suspend people's disbelief, but put the seed of the idea in people's heads.
Well, I'm gonna pick up on two things there. The Simpsons meme, that's actually from his campaign. So if you fact check when the episode aired, it's not as presented in the popularly shared conception of it. So that helps untangle that a little bit. I agree. Those types of predictive programming do exist, but that's a poor example of it because it falls apart if you check the dates. And people like myself, the first thing I did was, that's really interesting. Wonder if that's really true or if just people passed it around, right? So then I have to dig and find and offer that out when I hear it. The other aspect, much more interesting, The Shape of Things to Come, I think Wells wrote it in maybe 1938, or maybe that's when the movie came out. I'm pretty sure the movie was called Things to Come. It's a black and white movie, and basically what it shows is the advancement of military technology ends up creating this global war where a bunch of people, like basically everybody, loses all technology. They're sent back to the Stone Age. And so basically things are run by gangs and warlords. And that's going on. Spoiler alert, halfway through the book, halfway through the movie, Wings Over the World, this globalist ultra force that has super advanced technology, comes in. It's like, hey, warlords, you thought you were in control, but really we're in control. And it's another H.G. Wells predictive programming book, orchestrating globalist perspectives and showing like they can just take our technology away, send us to the Stone Age. And that's the same concept that's illustrated in that movie Elysium, where they're just like, leave the normies down here and they go live in space or, untouchable. So that's the function of modern government, because let's go back 200 years or so. In France, the people who ruled the country were known to the people. And when the people decided they didn't want that happening again, off with their heads, right? So since then, governments principalities, royal families, these sort of things were slowly replaced. A lot through World War I, as a matter of fact. And these governments end up being the proxies for those powerful families so that people, the citizens, just see it as the government or the president or the prime minister or whatever, and don't see that as being a proxy, a front for the powerful families that orchestrate those and the secret societies that help to build and maintain those type of apparati through history. Right? Look at the symbols on the buildings of those big things that you call government, right? So there's all these things that are coming together, but we only see the bottom of it. So we're like, oh, we vote for that. That's our thing with the Constitution, right? But that's not really, in actuality, what the actions prove. Like, they don't flesh out. So you have to look at the actual, not the hypothetical. The hypothetical is there's a constitution, the government is supposed to be run like this. Anything outside of that is not government, and so therefore it wouldn't have authority. We've gone way, way, way past that. So in order to figure out where we are today, what's going on, how to fix it, we need to look back and learn a little bit about they, them, those who can easily be named and how they put this whole panopticon together so that at least going forward, future generations know they exist. Like, this exists. These are the people who built it. This is how they built it to work. This was their goals. This is the way out. There are exits to the rat race, right? But they're not well advertised. Let me get to this this next little reading here. Let me click over to the book. That button. I'll turn the light on. I think we need some light on this. I love this quote right here. Propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. Page 48, if you guys are playing at home. Tyler, do you have that highlighted? In itself, the word propaganda has certain technical meanings which, like most things in the world, are neither good nor bad, but custom makes them so. I find the word defined in Funk and Wagnall's dictionary in 4 ways. Propaganda. 1. A society of cardinals, the overseers of foreign missions. Also, the College of Propaganda at Rome, founded by Pope Urban VIII in 1627 for education of missionary priests. Well, that's like the State Department, right? Let's see, foreign missions, missionaries, central body. That's like a Secretary of State job. Evangelizing their type of freedom. Right? So it goes over here. Let's see. The Scientific American in the recent issue pleads for the restoration of a respectable usage of that final word propaganda. There is no word in the English language, it says, whose meaning has been so sadly distorted as the word propaganda. The change took place mainly during the late war when the term took on a decidedly sinister complexion. So until World War I, it was okay. Propaganda means to propagate, to put forward. If it's educational, that's okay, but these guys were working with deception. Quote, if you turn to the Standard Dictionary, you will find that the word was applied to a congregation or society of cardinals for the care and oversight of foreign missions, which was instituted at Rome in the year 1627. It was applied also to the College of the Propaganda at Rome that was founded by Pope Urban VIII for the education of missionary priests. Hence, in the later years, the word came to be applied to any institution, scheme for propagating a doctrine or system. So in and of itself, if it's a doctrine or system and it's telling people about that which exists, propaganda could be good. Right? Quote, judged by this definition, we can see that in its true sense, propaganda is a perfectly legitimate form of human activity. In any society, whether it be social, religious, or political, which is possessed of certain beliefs and sets out to make them known, either by spoken or written words, is practicing propaganda. End quote. Another quote, truth is mighty and must prevail, and if any body of men believe that they have discovered a valuable truth, it is not merely their privilege, but their duty to disseminate the truth. If they realize, as they quickly must, that this spreading of the truth can be done upon a large scale and effectively only by an organized effort, they will make use of the press and the platform as the best means to give it wide circulation. Propaganda becomes vicious and reprehensible only when its authors consciously and deliberately disseminate what they know to be lies, or when they aim at effects which they know to be prejudicial to the common good. So that I read so we can get to the next page. Nevertheless, it is only necessary to look under the surface of the newspaper for a hint as to propaganda's authority over public opinion. Page 1 of the New York Times, on the day these paragraphs are written, contains 8 important news stories. 4 of them, or 1/2, are propaganda. The casual reader accepts them as accounts of spontaneous happenings, but are they? Here are the headlines which announce them. Now you see, Bernays had to ask a question there, right? That's a sign of being smart. He's like, oh, this is how he stays out of that, believing things that are not true. He asks questions. Then he finds out what's not true, and he tells people things that are not true, which conflicts with this other paragraph he wrote over here. Here's the headlines. Quote, 12 nations warn China real reform must come before they give relief. So before China could have relief, China has to make changes. That almost sounds like blackmail, something like that. Racketeering. Quote, Pritchett reports Zionism will fail, end quote. Quote, realty men demand a transit inquiry, end quote. End quote, our living standard highest in history, says Hoover report, end quote. Take them in order. The article on China explains the joint report of the Commission of Extraterritoriality in China, presenting the exposition of the powers stand in the Chinese muddle. What it says is less important than what it is. It was, quote, made public by the State Department today, end quote, with the purpose of presenting to the American public a picture of the State Department's position. Its source, give it authority, and the American public tends to accept and support the State Department view. The report of Dr. Pritchett, a trustee of the Carnegie Foundation for International Peace, this says, Pritchett reports Zionism will fail, is an attempt to find facts about the Jewish colony in the midst of the restless Arab world. When Dr. Pritchett's survey convinced him that in the long run, Zionism would, quote, bring more bitterness and more unhappiness for both the Jew and the Arab, end quote, this point of view was broadcast with all the authority of the Carnegie Foundation so that the public would hear and believe. The statement by the president of the Real Estate Board in New York in Secretary Hoover's report are similar attempts to influence the public toward an opinion. Modern propaganda is a consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence the relations of the public to an enterprise, idea, or group. All right, so before I find another quote, let's talk about that. Anything surprising, anything that's contrary to what you were led to believe growing up, that's a good example of what newspapers are used to do. They're used to showcase and promote opinions of people who are influencers from at or above governmental level. They're not used to promote our opinions. I mean, they might have an editorial section, letters to the editor, these sort of things, but in totality, newspapers and the people behind them pretty much not on the side of the readers. That's more evident today when you look at mainstream media and all these different channels that treat their audiences like they're lemmings, like they're less than adequate to assemble their own facts and conclusions and must be spoon-fed at every turn. This is what to think about Epstein. This is what to think about these different cases, right? Like that Project Veritas footage just came out with Amy Robach, and she's like, ABC had this story years ago and they sat on it, and she's like so surprised by that, right? These types of elements are top down, not surprising. Like that goes on. The guy who covered up the BBC Jimmy Savile scandal, yeah, he runs the New York Times. So the fact that these types of scandals get covered up, not surprising if you do the least bit digging into who are the individuals who are in control of these outlets and how did they get there? What is their resume? What are their qualifications? What do they actually do with their power, and for whom are they wielding that power? Because they're all proxies. They're all stand-ins. They're all representatives of real power behind the scenes. But most people take them, like they take the metaphor for the reality, and that's not what exists. That's not measurable. That's not scientific, right? Science exists in objective reality. It's measurable. It's tangible. So as soon as propaganda gets into people's minds, they conceive untruths as reality. And I think that's caustic to human existence. Certainly for the people on the other end of the bombs and all those propaganda campaigns that were conducted in the Western world, it was unfortunate for them that Bernays and these guys put those words together and published them in the newspapers and got people to believe those things and got funding to go kill them and their families and to take their territories, right? So there's many aspects. Learning about the content, learning the context of what's going on, learning how it affects people today. I mean, Dr. Pritchett from the Carnegie Foundation, his observation was right. Like, if they don't set that situation up properly, it's going to continue to fester and create war and instability. But if you look at it from the non-Dr. Pritchett angle, that's exactly what they want. Struggle, war, conflict, that's good for arms dealers who own nations, right? That's what's going on. So they're not incentivized to find peace. They're not incentivized to have peace in the Middle East. In fact, they make a lot more money and sell a lot more arms when there's fighting going on. So artificially contriving situations such that people fight with each other, like, that's third party, like ruining the lives of two other parties. And those two other parties aren't just two people. They're two big groups of people, right? So I think these things are important to consider, because everyone we know is being exposed to the toxicity and the ideas purveyed by mainstream media. And just the least little understanding of these sort of things can help to bridge the gap to be like, oh, you heard that, so do you think that's true? Why would you, and start asking some questions and not saying, you're stupid, it's the absence of our declarative sentences and the use of question marks that can help to bridge the gap with other people who are literally under mind control. Bernays and these guys, like, they figured out how to do it in the newspapers. This isn't even scientific MK Ultra type stuff. This was just using words on printed papers in the printing press and getting it out there to lots of people, and it's evolved to internet, right? So it's still like simple
before television, even what Bernays was saying was before television even. And another interesting book in regards to that, and a quote I wanted to read out of it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mass Control, Engineering Human Consciousness by Jim Keith.
I don't know. Can you see this?
Okay,
I put it under the book camp.
Right.
But they sent me this when they were producing State of Mind, and they wanted Kevin and I to take over the script writing. They're like, let us send you the books that we used for our research. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have.
It goes right in line with it. It goes right in line with it. Oh, you probably wouldn't, you said. So have you gone through the material, or what are your thoughts on Jim Keith?
I don't think I used any of that material in the film, but there might have been things that he hinted at and didn't have the evidence, and you go look, and if you can find the evidence, then it's like a good thing to weave in there.
There's an interesting paragraph here just in regards to what you're saying. It says, and I need a document cam. Now you're inspiring me to up my game here and gonna have to have a sweet document cam. But it says, media management does not always have to be dramatic. Simple distraction and the circuses, quote unquote, part of the historic bread and circuses formula is another effective technique. The dissemination of entertainment or popular culture and useless factoids has channeled public attention away from the more important issues such as poverty, human rights abuses, the equitable distribution of wealth of the world, true political representation for the vast majority of humans, and media control by the elite. This is one of the main functions of the television, which is in essence a propaganda box, spewing out positive drug-like reinforcements of sex, violence, and stimulated social interaction. And, they call it television programming for a reason, right? Because, that's a little bit beat up, but it's true. It's designed to program you. And, Bernays and those guys were working in a time that could definitely foresee that. But, what makes you wonder if they even understood the full impact of what was coming down the pipe. And now we have the internet, but if you look at the internet itself, I mean, it's a DARPA created, DARPA, ARPA military apparatus that was, provided to us once they'd had developed it. So you always have to wonder there too about how much of it is really just free, open information and not, now we're seeing the algorithms come in that are going to program us algorithmically through our devices and through whatever, we're intaking through the different screens that we look at. So there's a whole nother level of propaganda. And so I think this book goes into a lot more the nuts and bolts But there's several angles you can enter in that realm as well, though.
Well, and that's good that you mentioned that book, because there's probably a whole bunch of other books that I would have mentioned before I got to Jim Keith, but I do have that book, and there is some interesting concepts in it. It's just not I like to lead with the strongest pieces of evidence. And if we were 15 books into the topic, I'd be like, oh, also Jim Keith wrote a book on that. But you pulled a useful quote out of there. And so therefore it was apropos to inject in the conversation, and those who might be interested, know that that's another book they can check out. That's more modern, because that was written in the last 20 years, right? You don't have to check. All right. So,
I got a question.
go ahead, rock with it.
So if the power of medium is their ability to reach an audience, how is it that they remain popular? I think is probably a question that we need to ask.
How does the media remain popular? Like, why aren't they extinct yet? The mainstream media that purveys toxic information to people daily, as that's their job, to cover up truth and to present untruth.
Well, like for example, how Facebook kind of gives you those those kind of positive feelings that they kind of create a habit to keep your attention and keep you coming back. They're creating something that you can kind of be addicted to, and by gaining that power over a larger portion of the population, they're really kind of cementing their popularity.
Yeah, I mean,
that's just an example.
Facebook is the next evolution, and basically it works like a mosquito, insofar as the mosquito is going to give you a little numbing agent so that you don't mind being there, while it sucks out your private precious fluids, your data, your precious bodily fluids, to quote Kubrick. They're sucking your data. It's surveillance. It's self-participatory surveillance, so that because their problem from an intelligence standpoint, and intelligence serves the executive class, right? Bankers, industrialists created intelligence agencies as their proxies to solidify their positions, to take out enemies, to blackmail, to do a whole bunch of things that most American people and most people of the planet aren't taught about, right? So those things are out there and they exist. What do they need? They have technology. They have the ability to create these algorithms. What do they need? They need massive amounts of personal data to train those algorithms so that they can build profiles, so they can model a Michael Nimitz who's just like 99% on. Like their model predicts your behavior because they have gotten so much of your private information. They don't even need to watch you anymore. They'll be like, oh, it's Wednesday at 4:00. Michael's doing this because every other Wednesday at 4:00, except once, he has done this thing, right? So they would just pick out patterns, and then they can do what's called parallel construction. Right? They see a hole in your schedule. That's a vulnerability. They could say you were someplace else. Oh, look, Michael had no cell signal for 2 hours. He can't place his whereabouts. He could be a good patsy for this situation. Right? So there's like all these things that you're in the middle of as an individual, just trying to use a phone, have like some sort of connectivity to the world. And Facebook, Google said, don't be evil. Like that was their thing. Like, oh, don't be evil. And then they're like, oh, by the way, we're evil. You guys believe that declarative sentence, suckers? Like, it's propaganda. That was legit, straight up propaganda. Their goal with Google Video was to have like every piece of video on the planet, and people was like, oh, these people don't want to be evil with anything, so let's just give them all our video. Let's give them access to our private data, because people believe words that are not true. That causes a lot of pain in the world, legitimate like human suffering internally and externally, and intellectual self-defense is an asset to protect you from that, but it is a liability for them to have their population have those type of assets in their brain to make you immune to that situation. Otherwise, you believe everything you read, like most people, especially if it's from an authority, like a newspaper or on TV, right? People on TV are special. No. Fallacy of authority. Did that cover your question? Observation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I just think as technology improves, it's becoming easier and easier for them to really control people's attention and certainly steer their attention. And so all the things that are kind of happening to us that we reflect on as kind of, what are the trends, like attention span, for example, are things that we absolutely have to fight against, or, observe, and then, alter our own behavior to go on the opposite way.
All right. So at this point, there's the next section I wanted to read. It is a little bit verbose. So I'm going to put myself on screen while I read it so you can see like the reader, in case that's exciting to you. And otherwise, some people just seeing the text, they lose attention. So we're going to see what works. Let me juggle my duties here. Browser, books plus me. That's where we're at right there. Get some spectacles on. We are off to the races. This comes from chapter 4, The Psychology of Public Relations. The systematic study of mass psychology revealed to students the potentialities of invisible government of society by manipulation of the motives which actuate man in the group. Trotter and LeBon, who Tyler mentioned, who approached the subject in a scientific manner, and Graham Wallace, Walter Lippmann, and others who continued with searching studies for the group mind, established that the group has mental characteristics distinct from those of the individual and is motivated by impulses and emotions which cannot be explained on the basis of what we know of individual psychology. So the question naturally arose, if we understand the mechanism and the motives of the group mind, is it not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without their knowing about it? What does that mean? It means these guys got together legitimately. They said they want to control your mind without you knowing about it. Not just you, the individual, you, all of you as part of the group. They understood that controlling groups is much easier than controlling individuals because you can just get individuals to put themselves into groups. Let me go to this page here. 73. Let's get it sized up here. Propaganda, like economics and sociology, can never be an exact science for the reason that its subject matter, well, the subject is like human beings, like theirs deals with human beings. If you can influence the leaders, either with or without their conscious cooperation, you automatically influence the group which they sway. But men do not need to be actually gathered together in a public meeting or in a street riot to be subject to the influences of mass psychology. Because man is by nature gregarious, he feels himself to be a member of the herd, even when he is alone in his room with the curtains drawn. His mind retains the patterns which have been stamped on it by the group influences. A man sits in his office deciding what stocks to buy. He imagines, no doubt, that he is planning his purchases according to his own judgment. In actual fact, his judgment is a melange of impressions stamped on his mind by outside influences which unconsciously control his thought. He buys a certain railroad stock because it was in the headlines yesterday, and hence it is the one which comes most prominently to his mind. Because he has a pleasant recollection of a good dinner on one of its fast trains, because it has a liberal labor policy, a reputation for honesty, because he has been told that J.P. Morgan owns some of its shares. Trotter and LeBon concluded that the group mind does not think in the strict sense of the word. Oh, there's a typo over that. Look at that. Typo in their book. I like finding other people's mistakes as well as my own. So what does that mean? The group mind does not think. Groups cannot ask questions. Groups cannot find answers. Groups, all they can do is react, like herds of animals or schools of fish. In fact, schooling is to train our reactions. But I digress. Page 74. But when the example of the leader is not at hand and the herd must think for itself, it does so by means of cliches, like conspiracy theorists, pat words or images, which stand for a whole group of ideas or experiences. Not many years ago, it was only necessary to tag a political candidate with the word interests to stampede millions of people into voting against them, because anything associated with the interests seemed necessary corrupt. Recently, the word Bolshevik has performed a similar service for persons who wish to frighten the public away from a line of action. By playing upon an old cliche or manipulating a new one, the propagandist can sometimes swing a whole mass of group emotions. Now, continuing on over here on page 75. Well, bottom of 74, we'll pick it up. Men are rarely aware of the real reasons which motivate their actions. A man may believe that he buys a motor car because, after careful study of the technical features, all of the makes on market, he has concluded that this is the best. He is almost certainly fooling himself. He bought it perhaps because a friend whose financial acumen he respects bought one last week, or because his neighbors believed he was not able to afford a car of that class, or because its colors are those of his college fraternity. It is chiefly the psychologists of the school of Freud who have pointed out that many of man's thoughts and actions are compensatory substitutes for desires he has been obliged to suppress. A thing may be desired not for its intrinsic worth or usefulness, but because he has unconsciously come to see it as a symbol of something else, the desire for which he is ashamed to admit to himself. A man buying a car may think he wants it for the purposes of locomotion, whereas the fact may be that he really would prefer not to be burdened with it and would rather walk for the sake of his health. He may really want to buy it because it's a symbol of social position and evidence of his success in business or means of pleasing his wife. Page 76. Only by understanding, let me go back to the sentence, otherwise it won't make sense. It is not sufficient to understand only the mechanical structure of society, the groupings and cleavings and loyalties. An engineer may know all about the cylinders and pistons of a locomotive, but unless he knows how steam behaves under pressure, he cannot make his engine run. Human desires are the steam which makes the social machine work. Only by understanding them can the propagandist control the vast, loose-jointed mechanism which is modern society. The old propagandist based his work on the mechanistic reaction psychology then in vogue in our colleagues. This assumed that the human mind was merely an individual machine, a system of nerves and nerve centers reacting with mechanical regularity to stimuli like a helpless, will-less automaton. It was the special pleader's function to provide the stimulus to the world, which would cause the desired reaction of the individual purchaser. It was one of the doctrines of reaction psychology that a certain stimulus, often repeated, would create habit, or that the mere reiteration of an idea would create a conviction. Who is it that influences the eating habits of the world? The answer obviously is the physicians. The new salesman will then suggest physicians to say publicly that it is wholesome to eat bacon. He knows as a mathematical certainty the large number of persons who will follow the advice of their doctors because he understands the psychological relation of dependence on men on their physicians. The old-fashioned propagandist, using almost exclusively the appeal of the printed word, tried to persuade the individual reader to buy a definite article immediately. This approach is exemplified in a type of advertisement which used to be considered ideal from the point of view of directness and effectiveness. You, perhaps pointing the finger at the reader, buy rubber heels, buy O'Leary's rubber heels now. So that's like Uncle Sam, I want you for the U.S. Army, which was also Lord Kitchener, I want you for the British Army 4 years before. You buy a Mozart piano now. It is cheap. The best artists use it. It will last for years. The claims may all be true, but they are in direct conflict with the claims of other piano manufacturers and in direct competition with the claims of a radio or motor car, each competing for the consumer's dollar. What are the true reasons the purchaser is planning to spend his money on a new car instead of a new piano? Because he has decided that he wants the commodity called locomotion more than he wants, there's another typo, the commodity of music? Not altogether. He buys a car because it is at the moment the group custom to buy cars. So he goes on how modern propaganda works There's some examples, but I also wanted to get to, before it gets too late for this meeting, the Cheney brothers. Now, let me cut back for a second. Back in 2013, we interviewed Bill Binney here in Manchester, Connecticut, at one of the old Cheney brother silk mills. So Manchester is famous for having these silk mills. They brought the worms back from the old China trade, which was an opium-related trade, and they started producing silk, and the brothers were called the Cheney brothers. Now, I think there is a distant relative of theirs who moved away, like a section of the family that moved away, and that's where Dick Cheney comes from. But the Cheney brothers are mentioned in here by Edward Bernays, and because we have that historical artifact of one of their mills in common with things that we've produced, I wanted to hit up on what the Cheney brothers brought in terms of propaganda. Let me see if I can find that page again. I lost my page. What am I going to do? Am I going to panic? No. I'm going to persist. Here we go. Let's see. Switch over so you can see. Copyright 1925, The New York Times Company. Special cable to the New York Times, Paris, February 15th. Let me get this straightened out. For the first time in history, American art materials are to be exhibited and in the decorative arts section of the Louvre Museum. The exposition opening on May 26th with the Minister of Fine Arts, Paul Leon, acting as the patron, will include silk from the Cheney brothers, South Manchester and New York. Their designs, which are based on the inspiration of Edgar Brand's famous French ironworker and modern Bellini. Let's see. The silken fabrics possess a striking composition showing the characteristic brand motifs which are embodied in the tracery of large designs by the Cheney artists, succeeded in the translating the iron into silk, a task which might appear almost impossible. The strength and brilliance of the original design is enhanced by the beauty of the warmth of the color. The silks of the Cheney brothers, a commercial product produced in quantity, gained a place in public esteem by being associated with the work of a recognized artist and a great museum. So, claims to fame, make art, put it in expensive places, get coverage by Eddie Bernays. The last section I wanted to touch on, are there any questions before I move to the last section? Let's just do that because I don't want to leave good questions or observations on the cutting room floor. I'll take a moment to take a sip while you gather your ideas.
Hi, Richard.
How you doing?
Okay. One thing I wanted to bring up is something I think all of us need to remember, and I needed to remind myself of this. When battling this type of thing, this type of propaganda or mind control or, the modern equivalent psyops, we have to always think, what was the last original thought that you had? Now, that is a very old question. Many people have asked that before. I don't even know the source of it. But if we internally ask, what was the last original thought that you had, it helps us to really identify some of the areas that we're being manipulated in. So I wanted to share that with everyone and give people thoughts.
Well, and that's a really good question. And so the general answer, because everybody's got a different specific answer, and that's not necessarily useful. The general answer is when you are listening, internalizing, and then thinking about it, and you ask questions, and then you come up with new creative, inventive, and ingenuitive ideas. So that original thinking comes from observing through your five senses, internalizing, asking some questions, and then those thoughts, those are your thoughts when you're asking questions. But having the thought of declarative sentences is the programming. So when's the last time that you weren't thinking in declarative sentences is probably also the same time that you had an original thought, unless you're repeating somebody else's question. Thank you, Pam. That was quite insightful and useful. And I think that will lead us into this last section. It's chapter 7. Yes, I do know how to read Roman numerals. It's a wonderful skill set, being able to read Roman numerals. This one's called Women's Activities and Propaganda. Women in contemporary America have achieved a legal equality with men. This does not mean that their activities are identical with those of men. Women, in the mass, still have special interests and activities in addition to their economic pursuits and vocational interests. Women's most obvious influence is exerted when they are organized and armed with the weapon of propaganda. So organized and armed, they made their influence felt on city councils, state legislatures, national congresses, upon executives, upon political campaigns, and upon public opinion generally, both local and national. In politics, the American women today occupy such a more important position from the standpoint of their influence in their organized groups than from the standpoint of the leadership they have required in actual political positions or in actual office holding. The professional woman politician has had, up to the present, not much influence, nor do women generally regard her as being the most important element in question. Ma Ferguson, after all, was simply a woman in the home, a cat's paw for a deposed husband. Nellie Ross, the former governor of Wyoming, is from all accounts hardly a leader of statesmanship or public opinion. So he goes through. But the names that are mentioned are interesting because they do have connectivity to next week's talk. They were talking about the Shepard-Towner bill, which stipulates the support of central government of maternity welfare in state governments. This bill would not have passed had it not been for the political prescience and sagacity of women like Mrs. Vanderlip and Mrs. Mitchell. Now, Frank Vanderlip is a very important Wall Street banker. So this progression of this bill ties back into some of the other people we can get to on this page right here. Possibly the effectiveness of women's organizations in American politics today is due to two things. First, the training of a professional class of executive secretaries or legislative secretaries during the suffrage campaigns, where every device known to the propagandists had to be used for regiment of recalcitrant majority. Secondly, the routing over into peacetime activities of the many prominent women who were in the suffrage campaigns who also had devoted themselves to important drives and mass influence movements during the war. Such women as Mrs. Frank Vanderlip, Alice Ames Winter, Mrs. Henry Moskowitz, Mrs. Florence Kelly, and several others. Oh, Belmont, Mrs. O.H.P. Belmont. I wonder if she's related to August Belmont, who ran the Democratic National Party for the Rothschild family in the 1800s. If I seem to concentrate on the accomplishment of women in politics, it is because they afford a particularly striking example of intelligent use of the new propaganda to secure attention and acceptance of minority ideas. Now, this is 100 years ago. Do we see any of these techniques being used today to advance ideas? Can you guys think of any examples where propaganda is being used by groups of people who get together and profess that they have the answer and you don't need to, like, your answer doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you came up with. They have the answer and you must obey.
Yeah, like NIST. We should always just believe everything that the NIST organization puts out. Even if there's like thousands of architects and engineers, like from the University of Fairbanks, Alaska, who put out a report on basically, firing missiles at the official explanation of what occurred on 9/11. And I thought the connection that you made with Cheney was very interesting, that he might have some additional information on how to possibly, wield, the power that he had to manipulate people's minds in certain ways. And a lot of people do kind of put him as a higher up in the tier of organizing the events of that day. At least those of us that are on the side of asking questions and inspecting the answers that we're getting very critically. So yeah, so there, I can think of a couple examples, Richard, to answer your question.
I think propaganda depends on belief, and science is supposed to be antithetical to belief. Like, belief is supposed to be relegated to the confines of religion. And science is supposed to deal with that which exists. It starts with evidence, and then it asks questions to try to understand that which exists. What they're promoting is They wish this thing existed, so they're going to promote these ideas so then you can think that it happened like science, but that's the opposite of science. Like starting with hypothesis and looking for evidence to support that hypothesis is the opposite of science. So if you just show people like they want to have the conversation, great. Draw it on a piece of paper, on a napkin if you have to. Over here you have evidence and you have hypotheses to explain the evidence, and over here you have hypotheses looking for evidence to support them. One of these is science and one of these is like mind control. Which one do you think is science? And then I can know who I'm talking to and like what their mindset is. But without that defining framing of the context, like setting some groundwork, you are setting yourself up to waste your time, somebody else's time, probably to have emotional reactions, because that's not a useful exchange of information. The bridge has not been built yet between you two to be able to transport that heavy type of concept, right? So it's like the guy who climbed the World Trade Center when they were first building it, and he walked on the tightrope across it. He didn't, like, to get the rope across there, he used a bow and arrow. So he probably starts with like fishing line, something very light that they can get to the other side. And then they take a slightly more cordier cord across until they get up to something you could stand on and have the tensile strength to ratchet it up and walk across. So it's an interactive process. It's not just, I'm going to say this thing to you. It's going to be a truth bomb and you're going to wake up and understand from that. More likely, it's a soft-spoken question, a whisper at the right time that gets people to think, rather than trying to like bullhorn them every day with the conclusion without presenting them with, here's that which exists and here's my observation and step-by-step method by which I came to my conclusion. And now that you understand that, we can have a conversation. If you don't have those elements in place, you're just basically parroting propaganda back and forth based on which outlet you got it from, right? And that's not real human growth or conversation. It's like much ado about nothing.
Right. Yeah. But in regards to the propaganda, surrounding that day, or another example is just the climate change stuff. And, what was just really called strictly for a while there global warming. And then suddenly, we just kind of slightly changed the language on that. And now it's just, climate change. And we're supposed to battle against something that, the word itself, it just sort of naturally occurs. The climate is changing, and then
we have a problem with Earth rotation too. And this precipitation with gravity, right? That's a problem as well.
We got to fix all these problems. And so that is more subtle over time. That's sort of, they had like a longer term strategy, because I've been hearing the same stuff since I was a child from the central authorities on the matter, right? That can't be questioned, but even though they're constantly changing the message and the facts don't line up, but that's like a slow trickle where, the first thing I brought up, 9/11, that's like, it happened in an instant or over one morning. And then there was the aftermath. And then I think they're using all this stuff that Bernays is talking about still, obviously on a much higher, more advanced level. So this is like the For Dummies book now. And now there's way more advanced techniques. So it's important to understand that these are, almost like the basics, and, but there's even more basic than this you can go, the basic fears that human beings have and how those are played on, the fear of the dark, the fear of scary things happening at night, or, things that are unknown. There's really subtle techniques, but, over time they've centralized all this information, and it's gotten to a point where now it's so advanced that we're definitely still just catching up. Here, this is kind of like a meager attempt to start to understand some of the levels of things that are going on now, because it's always good to kind of magnify what we think is happening. By 30, if you think you've got it figured out, there's stuff that's happening. And technology, like we were talking about last night, that the military has and has most likely deployed on the civilian population, the lab rats here on this continent, that they probably don't show their hands very often, but a lot of the alien things and UFOs, or different unknown phenomena that we see that we don't understand, is probably a lot of its military tests and things like that going on that we can't imagine it, because it's so far beyond what we think is out there.
Well, and going back to your point about fear, they use fear to control the population, to control the herd, to steer the herd. And like I think it was in last week's lecture, probably around hour 3 or somewhere in there, when I asked the question, like, which of your fears do not correspond to some loss of freedom? So fear, it has a direct relationship to freedom, and so does learning. and learning has a direct relationship to fear. So it is like there is a convection current. You have fear, learning, and then you have progress from that. And if you don't, you're going to be controlled by that fear. So learning is the way to overcome fear. Once you know that, like being scared or in fear is your first step toward being brave or courageous, you just can't stay there. You have to take a step forward. You have to move. So learning about your fears insofar as they relate directly to potential losses in your freedom. A spider, a car crash, a political, organization, locking people up. Like those are all those places where people have fear. Ask the question, what is the relationship between this fear and my freedom? And then you'll start to get down to it. And then you bring the question over, and asking that question starts to dissipate fear in the first place, because learning is the answer. What's the question? What is the relationship between that fear and your freedom? They don't want you to realize how important your freedom is, but it's built into nature. It's built into nature. And if you don't think freedom's built into nature, go out and try to, get yourself a wild animal and get it to submit. It's going to fight you. I don't care if it's an insect or a squirrel or a fox. Life resists because it wants to remain free and autonomous. What they are seeking to produce are automatons. Like he says in his book, to produce automatons. People with groupthink that can be easily controlled and, go around throwing words like conspiracy theory at people instead of actually having some original thinking that starts between your ears. Any other questions, observations? I think I got to the end of the notes I wanted to share about that particular book. And even though this is not long form for me, it is long form for some people. So you're not going to draw too much more water from the well on that book unless you read it for yourself.
Well, going back to the subject of fears, can you hear me?
Yeah, Ferdinand, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Basically, one of my biggest fears over the years, learning about these sorts of things, is just the fear of not being taken seriously, the fear of ostracism, the fear of ridicule, all of that, because that's part of the group psychology. It's like, oh, you're saying something, that does not compute with the talking points that the crowd has received in school or from the idiot box or wherever. And, what you shared about, shooting the arrow back and forth, with thicker and thicker threads between the towers, sort of metaphorically speaking, or literally to create the metaphor. I don't know. I just don't have enough patience for that. I mean, it's much more human to be like, no. I've thought about this for decades and you haven't given it any thought. I'm right. You should listen to me, right? It's completely ineffective, obviously. So yeah, that's really the question is, what are the questions to ask others you're interacting with to get them to think? And that's the thing. You can't get people to think. You can invite them to.
Right.
And that's the best you can hope for.
All right. So you can lead a man to knowledge.
Unless you got other ideas, yeah. You can't make them think.
Right. So you can lead a man to knowledge, but you can't make him think. So the best we can do is offer timely and substantial questions. So if you're at the end of a long research process and you have your conclusion and you've looked at this and somebody else is espousing nonsense, yes, the easiest thing would be to say, you don't know what you're talking about. I've studied this. I'm the expert. You're wrong. Have a nice day. Like integrate that. Right. And that's not very effective. And
I don't literally say that, but
But people do act like that. Right?
Yeah.
So the way you could handle it is, you could relate. First, start by agreeing and empathizing. Like, oh yeah, like I totally understand where you're coming from, and ask a couple questions. Like I looked at that topic too. The first question I asked was, well, who's the company that owns, that whatever the toxic chemical that's in, name the product. Right? Like who makes that? And then I discovered this. And you could ask the question, what did you discover when you checked out the parent company? Well, I never clicked on that. Oh, okay. So I checked out the parent company and here's what's going on. And you could start and then ask some more questions. And basically what you're doing with those questions that they don't answer said, I have thought about this because I have asked and answered these questions. Now, I'm not saying I know everything, but I have gone further than you, and you could easily go just as far. In fact, I'm sharing my knowledge with you. Here's what I found. You don't have to believe me. I just gave you the map to go check it out. That can be much more efficacious in the communications, and it's a lot less friction. It's a lot less confrontational. And then the other magic phrase is, help me understand how you came to believe that. Global warming, climate change, interesting. Can you define what you're talking about, and can you help me understand? Because I'm completely ignorant on the topic.
Yeah.
So
I remember when it was the Ice Age coming.
Right in the 70s.
Yeah.
Right. So they had that Leonard Nimoy clip from
78, I think.
Yeah. What was it? In Search of, right? Or something like that. The show he used to do.
Yeah, In Search of, yeah.
And it's just the same type of dramatic, here's the music, and the world is freezing, it's getting colder, and this is the future. Yeah. So a bunch of declarative sentences that may or may not be true, and you have little control over the end result anyway. So buy some warm clothes and get on with life, right? Like, oh, things will get colder, things will get warmer. I'll be prepared to deal with either when it happens, not spend so much time thinking what it's going to do, but like participate in the now, what can be done, right? But you're right. Fear is used to, it's like muddying the whole process to keep us from thinking clearly. It is hard to think clearly and ask appropriate questions when you're in pain or when you're in fear. Ultimately, to get out of pain and fear, there's usually questions to be asked and answered to get there. Does that make sense? How'd that sit with you?
Yeah, I mean, it all makes sense. You know, where the rubber meets the road is practicing those conversations.
Yeah. Okay. So the
things
real
have
talk,
not been there's like, okay, I can count how many people I can talk to about some of these ideas on one hand, right? And and even with those people, there are certain issues you can talk about and certain you can't, right? And I don't know. I've been taking red pills for many, many years, but at the same time, it can go too far, right? Not everything is by grand design. There are many things that are, and
you're
like
right.
what some of it's just dumb luck, and some of it, but there are a lot of competing interests and grand designs out there. Anyhow.
Well, that's good feedback, and I think a lot of people can relate to what you're observing. And the fact is, in these cases, yes, it's easier said than done, because the done in reality involves another human being who's not so predictable. Even though they're carrying out mostly programming, there's a lot of nuance that they're bringing to the table that can make those conversations take unpredictable turns. So yes, there's organized corruption in the world, but the whole world is not organized corruption. So
right.
That's where I'm optimistic, because the things that we are saying are evil or not congruent with freedom, they're also artificial. They also have to be artificially maintained and groomed. Otherwise, it's going to turn back into freedom. So it's almost like they have to put up a resistance to freedom. Freedom is the existing force. It is natural. Their resistance is unnatural, and eventually they have to yield. And the way they yield is by individuals taking the power between their ears to ask questions, find substantial answers, to take actions in reality that bring them consistently pleasing results as a function of their knowledge, experience, and networking. Then it makes individuals very, very hard to control, which was the aim of propaganda in the first place. This book, he's trying to help, form and shape the intelligent masses into automatons.
That's all I have. Thanks.
You're very welcome, Ferdinand. Thank you for the insightful questions. Anyone else with questions on today's content, which is 1928 Edward Bernays' Propaganda? Calling once, twice. Who's got the closing thought?
Richard, I'll just add Thucydides, something that David Rodriguez did me that was appropriate. The secret of happiness is free.
Michael, you're breaking up right there.
Your point about fear.
I think we have
I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's a delay and you're breaking up a little bit. I just wanted to see if it would. settle out. Try again. Go ahead.
The secret to happiness is freedom, and the secret to happiness is freedom, and the secret to freedom is courage.
Well said. I like the way you put an exclamation point on this episode. Have the courage to learn about new books, to put them into your schedule, to consume them to whatever degree you find benefits you, and to do that consistently throughout your life, and to choose books that are going to add the type of value that you need to get to the next step on your journey. If you're reading about 15 steps ahead down the road, that's good. But are the 5 steps in front of you? Do you know what you need to do? Have you collected the relevant information? Have you identified the pitfalls and the other thing? Like, as long as you've done the work on the next couple steps in front of you, then yeah, go out there and figure out 21 steps down the road where you're going to be, what type of skills you might need, the angles you need to cover. But more importantly, figure out the next couple steps in front of you, flesh those out, and then you can look further ahead for your planning. So in the planning, know that there is propaganda out there. It uses declarative sentences. Propaganda very rarely has question marks. So when you see declarative sentences, think about it. The source, consider the source where you're getting it, and then ask some questions. And that's how you can remain impervious to it and help your family and friends stay at ease and free of its ill effects. All right, so we've gone almost 2 hours here. This will be a good second episode for quote-worthy smart reads. We'll nail down the title as we go along. But for all of you who participated today live and showed up for this live, do it live type of unfolding, it would have been very easy for me to delay it till next week so I could nail down some of these clicking and all this sort of stuff. But I think we all grew quite a bit through today's interaction, and I'm looking forward to doing this on a regular basis. So thank you all for tuning in and not dropping out, and I'll catch you guys on Discord shortly after I get this uploaded.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you all. Peace.